Welcome to BIA Media, Canada's top black media provider. Whether you're looking for content on fashion, art, music, or simple lifestyle, we bring you the best the black community in Ottawa has to offer and so much more. And better yet, do you have a project you need help with? Well, look no further. We provide equipment, studio, and office space, as well as a team of dedicated individuals to help you bring those ideas to life. So don't wait. Check out our new website at biamedia.ca for more information on how to contact us and start creating today. BIA Media, your way.
Greetings, everyone. Good morning. Welcome to our final session in our course, What History Class Left Out, Part 1, African History from 10,000 BCE to 711 CE. Today, we're going to wrap everything up in this course. We're going to end right at 711 CE, talking about where the African world was at that point, and that will lead us into the second part of this class, which actually doesn't take place until January or February, actually. We have a number of courses in between. I'll talk more about that at the end of today's class, and also we'll talk about what we are doing starting next week with our September seminar. So we'll talk about that. I'm going to jump right into it because we got a lot to go over today. Last week we talked about Christianity in Africa. We talked about the ancient kingdom of Aksum and how it was a world power around between the years 300 CE going into the 500 CEs. And we actually stopped around the 6th century with King Caleb of Aksum's invasion into southern Yemen and occupation of southern Yemen on behalf of Christendom, meaning his reason for going into southern Yemen was to save a group of Christians from an oppressive Jewish ruler in southern Yemen. At least that's what him and the Roman emperor said when they decided to go in there. So we're going to pick up right from there because that story actually leads us into Arab expansion into Africa and African resistance to Arab expansion, which comes on the heels of the Arabs becoming united under the religion of Islam.
Oh, good.
That's what we'll get into today. All right, so in terms of our timeline, we are going to stop right at 711. So we've covered everything up to this point, right where you see the Moors in 711. So we're not going to talk about the Moors today. We will pick up with them in the second part of this class. But where we will stop is right when the Moors are about to enter the Iberian Peninsula. So today's discussion is going to take place for roughly around a 200-year period, from around 500 CE to around 711 CE, about 500 years, and not 500 years, about 200 years. A lot happens in this 200 years. It's a very quick-moving history, particularly after the Arabs get united under Islam and they start making their moves. Things happen very, very quickly, and very global changing things happen in this time period. The evidence that we're going to rely upon today is very similar to last week. We're going to use Greek, we're going to use Ge'ez, we're going to use Latin, Arabic, and Coptic primary sources to kind of reconstruct this history. And of course, we can rely on archaeology. As we go further and further into the second part of this class, we will see a lot more of the written record and the oral record as our primary sources for the history. Archaeology will still be there, but it won't be as prominent because we don't need it as much as we did in earlier periods in history where you don't have the oral record and you don't have the written record. But archaeology still plays its role. And in fact, I'm going to show you, like I've been showing you the past couple of weeks, a recent study that shows where the discipline of archaeology is now and how other scientific disciplines have been brought in to expand our knowledge of what was going on during these historical periods. So for instance, this is an article that came out last year, 2023, in the Journal of African Archaeology. The title, Multi-Isotopic Investigation of Population Dynamics and Mobility Among Rural Medieval Christian Communities at Ghazali, Northern Sudan. we're going to be talking about these Christian communities in this part of Africa, which was then known as Nubia. We've talked about Nubia before, but this is the type of work that they're doing: multi-isotopic investigation. And this is done by mostly European scholars. You see folks out of the University of Warsaw in Poland, University of the Max Planck Institute for the Science of Human History out of Germany. You have someone coming out of South Africa. So it's a multidisciplinary team of scholars. Go back to what we talked about week one, when we talked about Shenkan Diop, who is considered the dean or one of the founders of the Afrocentric methodological position on African history, how we look at African history from an African-centered perspective. And Shenkan Diop told us, this is what we as African people need to do to reconstruct our history. We need these polyvalent teams of different types of scientists coming together to reconstruct history. And that's exactly what these European folks are doing. And this, I'm assuming he's an Afrikaner, South African, based off of his name. But I can't say that in 100% certainty, because if you just looked at my name, you might think I'm white. My name is Clyde Ledbetter. It's a Welsh name and a Scottish name. So names don't always tell us, but I'm 90% sure there's a white South African. But anyway, you have an archaeologist. You have a geologist, someone that studies, rocks and rock formations, one of the Department of Geological surveys. So you got Polish Center for Mediterranean Archaeology. So you got archaeologists, you have geneticists, and you have historians coming together to write this article. What did they do? Now I'm going to read this slow. And again, I'm not a geologist, and I'm not a physicist. I'm not a chemist. So I understand what these things mean from a layperson's perspective in terms of this type of science. I'm a political scientist. I'm not a physical scientist. But it says, there's the abstract. The archaeological site of Galazi, northern Sudan, provides a rare opportunity to investigate the dynamics of mixed economies and mobility on the fringes of the Nile Valley at the time of Christian expansion in Nubia. Thanks to its particular hydrological conditions, Sudan has a long history of diverse groups pursuing different economic activities, with agricultural communities settled along the fertile Nile Valley and various mobile pastoral groups occupying vast areas of the adjacent deserts. Ghazali represents an early medieval Nubian rural site with an extensive funerary zone. Somewhat removed from the Nile Valley, Ghazali extends along the western bank of a large Wadi Abu Dam. A wadi is like a valley area that only gets water when it rains, and then the water stays, but then when the rain is gone, it goes away. Across the Bayuda Desert, dated circa the 7th to the 13th century CE. Multi-isotopic analysis of human tooth enamel from cemeteries 1, 3, and 4 was used to explore patterns of mobility among these communities. 10 enamel samples were subjected to, and these are the scientific things that they use, and are very heterogeneous, suggests that the Ghazali community as a whole benefited from a variety of water sources, perhaps including significant contributions from groundwater wells. We suggest that this adds further support for the reconstruction of a mixed practice of agriculture and animal herding in the neighboring Bayuda Desert. These data add to growing evidence for diverse and flexible mixed economies in Eastern Africa that provided food security even under the most challenging of conditions. So all that to say, they took the teeth of people buried in this funerary zone, in these cemeteries, and they were able to use multi-isotopic analysis, meaning they took the tooth, they looked at the various elements present in that tooth: oxygen, carbon, lead, all the things that are on a microscopic level inside this tooth enamel. And they could tell from the makeup of the isotopes that were there what people were drinking, where the water sources were, what type of animals they were eating. All of these things you can tell from this type of analysis. And putting all that together, then based on the archaeological evidence and the historical record, they can say, well, we could tell that these people had a mixed economy. Some people were pastoralists, some people were agriculturalists. They were able to sustain themselves with food security, even when there was drought conditions, even when times were tough, because you had a mixed economy. They weren't relying on one thing. That tells us so much about these communities, how they lived, how many people lived there, what was the state of even social hierarchy in the community. You could tell that from this type of analysis. If certain people have certain isotopes present in their bones, in their enamel, you can tell what they were eating. Were they eating a lot of meat? Were they perceived to be of the upper classes and they had access to things that other people's enamel shows that they didn't have access to, that they were only eating agricultural products, they didn't have a lot of meat in their diet or whatever. You can figure all of that out through studies such as this. So again, when we talk about the reconstruction of African history, it's not just going out looking for documents or recording oral history. It's doing this type of analysis to give us clear pictures of what these societies look like. So really important. Just want to point these things out. All right, so going back into what we were talking about. And we're having some chair problems in here. That's what you keep hearing that noise. It's a chair keep on. All right, so the king of Aksum's invasion of southern Yemen, this is where we kind of left off last week. This happens in 520 CE. And this sets the stage for something else that happens later on. So as we mentioned, King Caleb invades southern Yemen. He frees the Christians from their Jewish overlord, and he takes over the region for a time. But he doesn't, we talked about that last week, he doesn't stay there. In fact, he doesn't even stay king. We talked about he was so devout in his Christianity, he thought his political obligations and military obligations were at odds with who he was as a Christian. So he became a monk. He renounced his throne. He becomes a monk. And he's, sainted as a saint in both the Orthodox Church as well as the Roman Catholic Church, because he did his invasion as in tandem with the Christian Roman emperor, even though they have different forms of Christianity, slightly different forms of Christianity. The Ethiopian church, alongside the Egyptian church and even the Nubian church, which we'll talk about, they were Miaphysite Christians. Miaphysite Christians, meaning they emphasized the divinity of Jesus more so than his human nature. Whereas the Roman Catholic Church recognized both. They say Christ is both completely human as well as completely God at the same time. Whereas the Miaphysites say he's much more divine than he is human. So that was kind of a divide in their theology. But in this particular instance, when they saw Christians being attacked by this Jewish monarch in southern Yemen, they came together and said, let's put those differences aside. Let's help these folks out. And because of that, he's been sainted. He's one of the few people that is a saint in both traditions. So when he renounces his throne and takes over, his troops are still in southern Yemen. They still have a presence in southern Yemen. Just like when the United States goes into a place, like when they invaded Iraq, it was back in 2003 or 4 where George Bush said mission accomplished, but yet troops were still in Iraq up until recently. So same thing in ancient times. You invade a place and you leave your troops there to make sure things stabilize, or you might want to incorporate the region into your empire or whatever. So his troops are still there. And one of his generals is a man by the name of Abraha, King Abraha. Abraha takes over. He's a general, but he takes over as king and actually breaks away from the kingdom of Aksum. So you have an Ethiopian general, and his life is really interesting. He actually started out as an enslaved person. He worked his way out through the military, got his freedom, becomes a general, and then essentially through almost like a military coup, becomes the king of this region in southern Yemen and breaks away from the power of Aksum. So he's running things in southern Yemen, this Ethiopian ruler. And Abraha is realizing that, I can turn this place into a moneymaker. If we go back, his kingdom, the kingdom of Himyar that he now controls, he realizes that, and he's Christian, he wants to build a church in his kingdom. If he builds a church, a big temple, he can get pilgrims from all over to come to his church. There's one problem with that, though. There is another pilgrimage site further to the north called Mecca. Now, this is in the 500s. This is before the Prophet Muhammad, right before the Prophet Muhammad's birth. In fact, the Prophet Muhammad is born in 570. So this is 50 years after the initial invasion by the Ethiopians. This new Ethiopian general is in charge. And in the year 570, he decides he is going to invade Mecca and tear down the Kaaba. Now, what was the Kaaba? The Kaaba is a holy site and has been a holy site in Arabia for thousands of years. Even before Islam, it was a place that people came and engaged in rituals, and it was a sacred place for even the pre-Islamic Arabs. According to Islam, the Kaaba was built by Abraham and his son Ishmael. In terms of their history and philosophy, the Arabs say we're the descendants of Abraham and Ishmael, whereas the Hebrews are descendants of Abraham's son Isaac. But they all share Abraham as their patriarch. But anyway, so according to Islam, Abraham and Ishmael built the Kaaba as a temple, as a sacred site dedicated to Allah, dedicated to God. But pagan Arabs had forgot about that and began using it for pagan rituals. So there are all types of idols and stuff in the Kaaba. Now, when this occurs, even while this is happening, with all the pagan stuff going on, what the Muslims call pagan worship, but the better word for it is just pre-Islamic Arab worship. It was a place of pilgrimage even then. So Arabs would come from all over to come to Mecca to engage in spiritual activities at the Kaaba. Well, King Abraha says, I don't like this because this is going to be a rival spiritual space to this temple that I'm going to build. So if I destroy it, that way everybody's going to have to come to me in my city for all these spiritual rituals and activities. And it wasn't for a religious reason why he's doing it. He's not doing this because he just wants to promote Christianity and everything. He's doing it because if you build a pilgrimage site, it brings money. These people won't have to come from miles away, and they're going to need housing. They're going to need food. They're going to bring offerings. It becomes a money maker. It's like building a new megachurch. He doesn't want the other megachurch to still be there. He wants those people bringing those offerings to his church. So he decides he's going to invade Mecca and bring all of these war elephants to tear down the Kaaba. That's his goal. He's defeated in this task. In the year 570, it's called the Year of the Elephant because he brought these elephants to Mecca to try to destroy the Kaaba. Now, in Islam, it's a really interesting story about how this occurs. So his forces are coming into Mecca, they're coming to tear down the Kaaba, and then all of a sudden God sends all of these birds with rocks in their mouths, and they drop rocks on the elephants, and they scare the elephants, and they won't come into Mecca, they won't come into the Kaaba, and they retreat back, and his forces are defeated. So it's a divine intervention that stopped him from doing what he was doing. What really happened, he just loses the battle. I mean, he just doesn't get to do what he wants to do. But this is very significant because this is the year that the Prophet Muhammad is born, 570 CE. He's born the year of the elephant, the year that the African general turned king, Abraha, was going to invade Mecca is the year that the Prophet Muhammad is born. Now, let me go back a little bit and talk about what's happening the year the Prophet Muhammad is born. So at this time, in 570, in addition to the kingdom of Aksum, you have two major empires in the region. You have a newly established and growing power of the Persians. The Persians have had various empires over time. This is the latest version of the Persian Empire. So they're operating here. What's, of course, Iran, what's now Iraq, and they're pushing their way further west. This is the Sassanid Empire of Persia. Further east, you have the Roman Empire. The Roman Empire. Now, they had their own internal battles, and then actually in the west, you kind of see it doesn't really extend to where the Roman Empire used to extend. The Roman Empire pretty much collapsed in the West in the 400s and 500s. There were other Europeans, Germanic Europeans and Vandals and all these other different groups that had taken over what used to be the Roman Empire in the West. So Rome is still strong, but it's really in North Africa, Palestine, what's now Turkey, Eastern Europe, that the Romans have their strength. And they're very rich, they're very powerful. I mean, the Western Roman Empire was never the wealth of the empire. So they didn't really lose a whole lot when they lost France and Germany and Britain. Yeah.
You say Rome, it says Byzantine.
It's still the Roman Empire. So Byzantium was the capital of the Eastern Roman Empire. There was a time where the Roman Empire actually split. So you had the Western Roman Empire with its capital in Rome, and the Eastern Roman Empire with its capital in Byzantium, which is now Istanbul. But they never stopped calling themselves Roman, even though they spoke Greek and all that, but they were still connected to the Roman Empire. And in fact, they were able to still, Rome was sacked a couple of times, but they were able to still maintain control over the actual city of Rome. It's almost like they had two capitals, Rome as well as Byzantium, but Byzantium was the more wealthy portion of it. So the Romans are there, even though they're Greek speaking, it's still the Roman Empire, and they're here, and they are battling the Persians for control over Western Asia. That's the battle at the time that the Prophet Muhammad is born. The Arabs are a non-entity in the region. I mean, they're people, they exist, they're traders, you know, they move goods and camel caravans and different things. The Prophet Muhammad was a businessman, was a trader. But for the most part, they're disunited. They're a clan society, so people are separated into different clans, and these clans often battled each other over access to oases and different things. Because remember, they live in a desert society, so if you can control water sources and water supply and all that, you have more power. So these clans are often fighting over control over these types of things, trade routes and all that. So they're a non-entity. So in this region, you have the Romans, you have the Persians, and then if we were to look further south, you have the kingdom of Aksum. These are the major powers in the region. All right, so the Prophet Muhammad is born. He lives his life. He has his revelation of the Quran. He starts spreading his message about, you know, there only being one God, and we got to get rid of these idols that are at the Kaaba. In fact, he cleans out the Kaaba, him and his supporters, they clean all the idols out of the Kaaba. He's preaching this message of there's one God, and this is how this God should be worshiped, and everyone is equal under this one God. And his message is gaining in popularity. But of course, there are other forces in Mecca that don't want to hear this because he's messing with people's money. When you start telling people there's only one God, then all these other temples and all these other rituals that want to happen, it interferes with that. So he's driven, him and his followers are driven out of Mecca, and they have to go to the city of Medina. Some of them go to Medina, and then there's another portion of them that actually go to the kingdom of Aksum. Let me get a better map. So they go from Mecca and Medina, and some of his followers get support from the king of Aksum, who's not Abrahat. I'm just using this map as an illustration. They actually go to the kingdom of Aksum, and the king says, you can come, you can practice your religion here, it's open. So this is the second time that a major world religious figure has gotten support from Africa. According to the biblical text, I think it's the Matthew nativity story. I'm not sure if it's the Matthew nativity story. When Herod is going to kill all the babies, Jesus' family escapes to Egypt, and he lives there for a while before he goes back to Palestine. So you have Africa being this place where religions are incubated, where they're allowed to not be extinguished, whether it's Christianity or whether it's Islam. They found hospitable places to be in Africa. But yet somehow later on, centuries later on, their followers seem to forget that and decide to demonize African people. But we'll get back to that. But at this point in the game, Aksum becomes a friendly place for the Prophet Muhammad's a portion of his followers. So by the time we get to 632, this is when the Prophet Muhammad dies, at 632. He has spent the better part of 10 years organizing and convincing the Arabs and fighting against the Arabs, fighting amongst the Arabs and spreading his ideology. Till it gets to the point in 632 that now the majority of Arabs are Muslim. They've adopted this religion. They've adopted the revelation of the Prophet Muhammad, the Quran, and they're united. The Arabs are united for the most part under this religion. And now they have the leaders of the new caliphs, the new leaders of the faith after the Prophet Muhammad. They see an opportunity not only to spread this message to the rest of humanity, there's one God and it's Allah, and the Prophet Muhammad is his messenger, all that. They also see the opportunity to build an empire, because they're looking at the geopolitical situation and they're saying, hey, wait a minute, the Persians are fighting the Romans and they've been going at it for decades and no one seems to be able to win. If we insert ourselves into this, we can take over everybody. And that's exactly what they did. And they were very effective, because remember, they had spent centuries fighting amongst themselves. They knew how to fight. Arabs knew how to fight. They knew how to use cavalry. They knew both horses and camels. They knew how to quick strike. They knew how to fight with limited resources. They've been fighting in the desert. So they knew how to fight. And they were able to take advantage of a contested geopolitical situation, a weakened Persia, a weakened Eastern Roman Empire, and they expanded tremendously. The Prophet Muhammad dies in 632. What the Arabs are really just contained to what you see in the bright orange, almost the red color here. After 632, between 632 and essentially 651, they take over everything you see in the orange. So in a matter of 20 years, essentially, they take over Iran, Iraq, Palestine, and also Egypt. They take over this in 20 years, that quickly, because they're able to take advantage of an area that's weak. Because the Romans, neither the Romans nor the Persians expected that they were going to be fighting Arabs. And of course, those two didn't join together to fight against the Arabs, so the Arabs were able to advance very quickly. Now, they gave people a choice when they advanced, because again, this wasn't, I'm saying Arabs specifically, because this was not a religious, it wasn't really a religious empire that they were initially set out to build. It was just a political empire, and the people that did it were Muslim. So they told the people when they came into these territories, all right, there's people of the book, and then there's pagans. People of the book, these are Christians and Jews, and then there are pagans, people that don't believe in the Abrahamic religions. But the Muslims gave them a choice. They said, you can continue to practice whatever it is you practice, particularly Christians and Jews, but you have to pay a tax. You have to pay a tax to practice your religion. So most people, initially, they just paid the tax. And this was good for the new Arab conquerors because it filled their treasury. As they're taking over new lands and forcing people to pay the tax to practice their religion, they're getting more money to continue their advancements. They could buy more weapons, they can get more people to join the military, and they could continue their conquest further east into India and further west into other parts of Africa. But eventually, people started to get smart to it. They're like, wait a minute, I'm just going to convert to Islam because I don't feel like paying this tax anymore. So this is one of the ways a lot of people converted to Islam. They converted in the military. They would join the Arabs. They say, well, our folks are defeated. I might as well try my luck with these people. And they would join the military and they would convert to Islam. Some people didn't want to pay the tax anymore. So they would convert to Islam so they didn't have to pay the tax. Some other kingdoms saw what was going on, realized this is a new power in the region. And just like they did with Christianity, I'm going to convert to Islam because I want to have economic relationships with this new power. So yeah, if converting to Islam is just saying that there's no God but Allah and Prophet Muhammad is his messenger, I could do that. Boom, I'm a Muslim. So a lot of leaders converted like that. Now, when it comes to Egypt, when it comes into the Arab invasion of Egypt, this goes back to what we were talking about last week with these different versions of Christianity and also Roman imperialism in Egypt. So the Romans have been in control over Egypt for a long time. Since, at this point in the game, we're talking about 600 years of Roman occupation of Egypt, Roman control over Egypt, going back to when Cleopatra VII and Mark Antony were defeated and Egypt was taken over by the Romans. Now, when Christianity comes into play, the majority of the population in Egypt are Miaphysite Christians. The Coptic church or the Egyptian church is Miaphysite Christianity. meaning they see Jesus as more divine than human. But the government is controlled by the Romans, who have Roman Catholicism, who are saying, no, the Trinity and everything is equal, and he's both 100% man and 100% God at the same time. So you have a theological difference between the rulers and the ruled. You also have heavy Roman taxation that the people have been struggling against for centuries, because the Romans want to squeeze every last bit of wealth from the Egyptians. And Egypt was incredibly wealthy, particularly in terms of agriculture. So the people are suffering under Roman rule. They don't like the heavy taxation, and they don't like the religious persecution, because the Romans didn't just say, all right, well, you can be Coptic. No, they tried to downpress the Coptic church. So the Coptic church had to become very monastic. It spread to Nubia. Of course, they had the relationship with the kingdom of Aksum, but it was definitely oppressed by the official Roman church. Yeah.
What's monastic mean?
Monastic, they formed a lot of monasteries. There's a lot of monks in remote places, and they prayed and that type of thing. That's so a strong monastic tradition. You see it in Ethiopia. There's evidence of it in Nubia, what's now Sudan, and of course in Egypt. Even to this day, you still have a lot of Coptic churches, because the Christian church is now the minority in Egypt. At this time, they're the majority. But what happens is, when the Arabs come out of Western Asia, they're almost given a welcome mat by the population. The population is not going to fight against the Arabs, because they look at the Arabs and they say, you probably can't be any worse than the Romans. So the Arabs take over control of Egypt from the Romans. The people put up little resistance, and the Romans aren't capable of fighting the Arabs. So they lose Egypt. It's a gradual process at first, because the Romans do have a very strong navy. The Arabs don't have a strong navy. They're not yet, at least. The Romans are able to keep control over the port city of Alexandria, but the Arabs start a new capital in Egypt, and that becomes Cairo. Cairo becomes the capital, which it still is today. But so the Arabs take over that, and then eventually they're able to wrest control over Alexander when they master naval battles, and Rome gets even weaker and weaker and weaker. So this is how the Arabs come into Egypt. This is how Egypt becomes an Arabized country. And then later on, we get to the 8th and the 9th century, you actually see Arab migration into Egypt. At the very beginning, it's just an Arab army that take over as an army of occupation. 2 centuries later, you get Arab settler migration into Egypt that really Arabanizes Egypt. Egypt becomes, Arabic speaking. It goes from being Coptic speaking and Coptic writing to being Arabic speaking and Arabic writing. All right, so they take over Egypt, and after that, and this is again in the 640s, 650s. Muhammad passes away in 632. So all this is happening very, very quickly, very, very quickly. The Arabs look around. After they take over Egypt, they want to keep going, because they're getting easy victories in Palestine, easy victories in Syria, easy victories in Iran, in Persia. So they think, let the good times roll. Let's just keep going. Until we get stopped, let's keep going. So they start looking west. What about taking over Carthage? What about taking over Numidia? What about taking over these areas in the west? And they look south from Egypt, like everyone does after they take over Egypt, whether it's the Persians, whether it's the Greeks, whether it was the Egyptians themselves in ancient times. The prize of the Nile Valley is Nubia. Let's take over Nubia too. Wow, we haven't been stopped, so let's do it. So the Arabs set their sights both west and north. Both south and west, excuse me. So when they look south, they're in contact with a newly unified kingdom of Nubia. Nubia had split up into 3 kingdoms. There was Noba or Nobatia in the north. There was Makura or Makuria in the middle, and there was Alwa or Alduia. You have different names for these places in the south. So 3 different kingdoms. But sometime around 650, these 2 united. Noba and Makuria united, became one kingdom, and they're Christian kingdoms. Miaphysite Christian kingdom. So they, were heavily influenced by the Coptic church in Egypt. And this is the place that those archaeologists are studying with the the tooth enamel. They're studying these ancient Christian kingdoms because we don't have a whole lot of writing about these places. We know that they were incredibly wealthy. They did a lot in terms of uh, building, in terms of the churches that they built and the monasteries and even the castles and fortifications that they built. So there was a lot of building going on, mixed economy. Some people were pastoralists, agriculturalists. Even though it wasn't mining and iron smelting to the extent of Merowe a couple of centuries earlier, they still were, engaged in those activities as well. And the one thing that they never forgot, the one activity that they made sure that they kept sharp on, going back to ancient times, their archery. This is Taseti. Remember, the land of the bow is what the Egyptians called ancient Nubia, ancient Kush. They kept that up. The Romans found that out. And we talked about Queen Amani-Reines and her defeat of the troops of Emperor Augustus. Well, now the Arabs are about to find that out because after they take over Egypt, they decide they're going to try to take over Nubia. Well, the Nubians are ready for them, and they fight and they defeat them at the Battle of Dongola, the first Battle of Dongola. It's a complete rout of the Arabs. In fact, after this battle, the Arabs, they referred to the people in Nubia as the Ramat al-Hadak, or the pupil smiters, because they said these people were able to shoot their arrows so accurately that they were taking out people's eyes. They said very few soldiers came back from these battles with both of their eyes because the Nubians were so good at taking out people with their archery. That was the first Battle of Dongola. The Arabs retreat back into Egypt, and then they eventually come back for the second Battle of Dongola. Dongola was a major city in Christian Nubia. So the Arabs come and they lay siege to the city. And they think they're winning for a time, but then those archers come. And in addition to the archers, the Nubians have an impressive cavalry as well. They're masters of horses. So just like the Arabs are masters at cavalry fighting using both horses and camels, the Nubians are also masters of cavalry warfare. In fact, and Daniel might be able to speak more about this, going way back, the Nubians were known throughout the ancient world for their horse breeding and their husbandry of horses and their ability to groom horses and ride horses, and they were valued as experts on horses. So, and again, Daniel knows more about this than me, so he might be able to tell you in the break. So they were able to defeat the Arabs again in the second Battle of Dongola in 652. I believe it's 652. 652. And this was done under King Kali Dorat, King Kali Dorat, at the Battle of Dongola. And they sued for peace. The Arabs had to sue for peace. And the peace said, Arabs, just like the Romans, you cannot cross the first cataract. That is the boundary. That's the boundary. That's the traditional boundary between Egypt and Nubia. It's the first cataract of the Nile River. You can't cross it. Yeah.
You say they sued for peace? What do you mean?
Meaning they got beat so bad that they're the ones that said, all right, well, we're sorry. Let's have a peace treaty. This actually changes, though, in Arab history, because there are some Arab historians, I mean, not Arab historians, Islamic historians, let me put it like that. Particularly, this was done during the time that Islam was about to split between the Sunnis and the Shiites. Essentially, I'm not going to get into it too much, but there was a debate over who should succeed the Prophet Muhammad. Should it be a blood relative, or should it be somebody selected by the followers of Islam? Well, when that split happens, you have this is done by the folks that decided that, you know what, it should be people that everybody agrees on. It doesn't have to be somebody that's blood related to the Prophet Muhammad. So the opponents of that view also wrote history, and they say the Nubians just handled these folks. They just beat them. And it was the Muslims that lost and the Muslims that were saying, hey, let's have a peace treaty because we don't want to lose anymore. Later on, Arab historians, not wanting to admit to this defeat by the Nubians, they said, no, we beat the Nubians and we made them sue for peace, which really doesn't make sense, because if you beat them, then you would have just taken over the area. So how could you beat them, but yet you still can't come over the first cataract of the Nile River? But this peace treaty lasted for centuries. It's called the Ba'ath. It's a peace treaty signed in 652 between the Nubians and the Arabs. And it would last until, I want to say, the 15th century, a good amount of time between these two groups, really till around the fall of Christian Nubia. So maybe in the 14th century. One of the longest lasting peace treaties in world history. And again, it just shows the Africans were able to maintain their sovereignty in the face of external aggression because they were unified, because they had this idea that we're going to fight it out, we're going to use our military expertise, and that unity, when these two Nubian kingdoms were united under the strong king, that allowed them to defeat this incoming army. Now, we're going to take a break because we're going to talk about what happened to the West, because it's the complete opposite, where they had the military capability and the fighting skill to resist the Arabs, but they lacked the unity that you see in Christian Nubia. So we'll talk about that when we come back from the break. All right, so let me open it up to any questions that folks may have, anything in the chat. So Daniel, I can't really see it as best as I normally can, so let me know who has their hand up and let them talk.
Okay, Mr. Francis and then David.
Thank you very much, and good morning, everyone. Dr. Ledbetter, what was the prevailing religion in Egypt before the Arab invasion?
It was the Coptic Church. It was the Christian Coptic Church, the Miaphysite Christianity. That was the religion of the bulk of the population. So again, going back to last week, Christianity had entered Egypt relatively early in terms of traditionally speaking, it's been the gospel writer Mark has been seen traditionally as the person that brought Christianity into Egypt. Now, we don't know if that's historically true or not, but that has been the tradition. And that happens the first few decades after Christ. So that happens early. So by the time we get to the 600s, that religion has gone really into the masses of the Egyptian population. So yeah, they're worshiping Coptic. Coptic just means Egyptian Christianity, Miaphysite Christianity.
I asked the question simply because I wanted to find out when the Jews were in Egypt. That was long before Christ was born.
Mm.
What kind of religion was being practiced there? Because they could not have been Christianity then.
Oh, then, okay, yeah, back then. So based off of what we can tell, and again, the Bible is not a historical text. We don't get a lot of dates that we can line up to different things, but in terms of the approximation, most people believe the Exodus story is set in New Kingdom Egypt. So at that time, the major god in Egypt was Amun or Amun-Ra. And then you also had other regional deities and different energies of spiritual figures connected to different things. So you had the Egyptian trinity of Asar, Set, and Heru. You had Ptah, you had Jehuti, you had all of these different religious figures. The major god, the primary god, was Amun, the New Kingdom. So that was what the Egyptians were practicing. That's who they prayed to and all of that. And you can see elements of that make its way into Judaism. In fact, it's really interesting when you think about it because Moses, his name is Egyptian. Moses has an Egyptian name. He comes up, according to the biblical text, he comes up in the house of the Pharaoh. So he would have been, practicing all of that stuff. And then he gets the burning bush episode and all that, and they're led out of Egypt. And they're not even gone that long before they start reverting back to Egyptian practices. They build a golden calf, which is a representative of an Egyptian deity, and they start worshiping that because Moses is taking too long with the law of God. So you still see the influences. And even in the New Testament, Paul makes it a point to say, I think it's in Acts, was not Moses learning and all of the wisdom of the Egyptians and all that stuff. So, yeah, that's what was being practiced in Egypt. And it would continue in various forms. They would adopt other elements of things all the way up until the bulk of the population becomes Christian. And then later on, the bulk of the population adopts Islam, and particularly when you have the Arab immigration in the 8th and 9th century. But then you still have a small minority of people that are in the Coptic church, and that still exists to this day. It's persecuted a lot in Egypt, but the Coptic church in Egypt still exists to this day.
Thank you.
David H., I think, go ahead.
Thank you, and good morning. Taseti, which language is that?
That is ancient Egyptian.
Yes, ancient, okay. And the Arabs are taking over because they have a different philosophy?
No, they're taking over because they want money. They're empire builders. I mean, that's the thing. And that's why I wanted to point out the initial expansion of Islam has not much to do with the religion is there because it united the Arabs. They're not necessarily, they might say in some things that this is all part of a jihad, but it's really not. It's just regular empire building. And in fact, we know that it is not really religious based because, again, they gave people the choice. You don't have to adopt Islam as long as you pay this tax. So it was really about building up that treasury, becoming a world power politically and militarily, and promoting the religion was almost like an afterthought. It's almost like, and if people become Muslim as a part of this process, so be it.
So then what lessons can be taken away about the waning of the Roman Empire, the Arabs taking over and applying to our current situation in today's economy?
I think there's a lot that can be taken from it. Let me come back to that toward the end, because I think it's a really good question and there's a lot. And I do see a lot of similarities between what happened here and what's actually happening now, where you have the waning of empires and there will be a void, and who's going to fill that void? And actually, we've seen it happen. I'll give you the perfect analogy, because we saw it happen in the 20th century. We saw this repeat, where you had Russia and the United States representing Persia and the Roman Empire going at it. Nobody expected China to just come out. They were united under Maoism. They go through their great leap forward and their great, what they call it, there's a great leap forward in the Cultural Revolution of the 50s, 60s. And then by the time we get to the 70s, the 80s, no one is prepared for China to, and then by the 90s and 2000s, they're essentially the superpower, because the Soviet Union collapses, the United States gets decadent and starts collapsing in and of itself and engaging in foolish wars in Afghanistan and Iraq. And China is just basically taking over. It come out of nowhere. In the early 20th century, China was like the Arabs before Islam. Nobody gave, they used to say you don't have a Chinaman's chance. China was backwards. China was a place that little Japan could take over during World War II. That, you know, people were dying of starvation and opioid addiction in the late 19th century and early 20th century by the millions. And it was just a place of cheap labor that could build railroads in Canada and the United States. No one cared about China. But they were united by Maoism. They built their society. They went through some horrible things that happened during the Great Leap Forward in the Cultural Revolution. There was a lot of violence things, but they come out of that stronger. And now they're in a position to essentially be the next world power, if they're not already. So there are a lot of lessons to that, but we'll talk about what that means for Africa. Let's talk about that in our second section.
Thank you kindly.
Anything else in the chat, Daniel?
No, there's nothing else in the chat, but I did have a thought about the first and second battles of Dongola. I think it's interesting that the Arabs made it a point to refer to the people of Makuria as pupil smiters, because I recently found out that Dongola in Nubian text is actually referred to as Tungol, which in
Mm.
Old Nubian is actually etymologically related to the Nubian word for bowman or for archer.
Wow. So you pick a fight with a place called, I'd be like picking a fight with a place called AK-47ville or something like that. Like, this is probably not the best place to try to fight. But also, Daniel, could you mention a little bit about, briefly, about the research you did around the Nubians as experts in cavalry and horses?
Yes, I can. So there's a city in, I believe it's in southern Egypt called Tombos, which Egypt, where there was a lot of Egyptian and Nubian cultural influence and intermingling. And Egyptologists have found burials of a horse over there. It was a female horse. I don't remember how old she was, but we can tell that Tombos was probably one of the first places where Nubians started to associate horses with royalty and with nobility. And then by the time we get to the Kingdom of Kush in Egypt's 25th dynasty, we start to see horses becoming a symbol, equating with nobility. One of the kings of Kush, Pianki, even talks about how he went to Egypt and one of the provincial rulers over there had like malnourished his horses and he was very grieved about that. So yeah, horses were always very important in Nubia. And by the time that we start seeing interactions between North Africa and the Assyrian Empire, we start to see Nubians exporting horses over there. And so, like, in the same way that now we could think of like an Arabian horse or a German Shepherd, a lot of people in the ancient world would have been familiar with Nubian horses.
Mm. Thank you for that. Thank you for that. And again, a lot of this is coming from Assyrian text. So when we talk about the empire of Assyria, we're talking about modern day Syria, and the Assyrians are taking over Palestine at some point. That's the area that we're talking about. So you see the African presence all over Western Asia in a position of equality, in a position of shared world power, not in a position of dependency. So again, it's one of the reasons why I love teaching this class. It takes us all the way back because you see Africa viewed in a much different light by the rest of the world. A lot of reverence, a lot of respect. This is a period before you get scientific racism or any other type of things where human beings are just engaging with each other uh, culturally, religiously, that type of thing. And it's really important because it shows us that these things that we believe, they're not innate in human nature, and they can be changed because they didn't always exist, and they don't always need to exist. All right, thank you for that. Robert, did you have any something?
I did, brother. Yes. A few comments and then a question. Actually, first of all, it's good to be back in the room, man. So that's good. Second is, and I give you full authority to use this one, but dental records, man, that's another form of oral history. Just saying.
That's true.
Just saying.
That's true.
I can see another good question coming up for our end of term quiz, and that'll be what peace treaty was signed in the 600 CE between the Arabs and the Nubians that was one of the longest lasting peace treaties of all time? Yeah, still good. Yeah, just to make that point again, that we're here. We are learning about the Arab invasion that happened around 600 CE, and just a reminder that the pyramids were built around 2000 BCE, right? Is that right? Yeah. All right. So they weren't there to build them. So just making that point. And the question is, okay, so in Sassanid Persia and the Persian Empire, what religion were folks, and were there any Muslims yet? Because that's Persia is Iran, right?
Is Iran now.
Which today is mostly Muslim, right?
Yeah, this is when it becomes after the invasion. But at the time, you got Christians in Persia, you have Jews in Persia, but the majority of religion and the religion of the ruling class is Zoroastrianism. in ancient times, this was a very well-known religion. You don't have a lot of Zoroastrians today. I don't think you have. You probably, I mean, there's people that believe everything, so you probably do have a pocket of Zoroastrians, and I might even be pronouncing it correctly, but that was the religion of the majority of people in Persia. It's a really interesting religion. It's a very peaceful religion, actually. Zoroastrianism, there's some aspects of it that people believe were adopted by both later versions of Judaism as well as Christianity, because it's actually in Babylon, in captivity under the Persian Empire that a lot of the biblical texts are written. So there's a lot of overlap with thinking in the ancient world in terms of divinities and spirituality. So you'll see similarities between Zoroastrianism, Christianity, and later forms of Judaism as well. But yeah, that was the faith in Persia. All right, so let's keep it going. The Arabs, they've taken over Egypt. They got defeated in Nubia. Part of their generals say, let's keep pushing west. This is another area, again, this was controlled by the Romans, and the Romans, just like in Egypt, had issues with the people in North Africa, both in Numidia, which we talked about, as well as the remnants of the great kingdom of, not kingdom, but the great trading empire of Carthage. We talked about Hannibal and all of that, and the Punic Wars and everything. So since that time period, the indigenous people in North Africa, the Amazigh, who the Romans called the Berbers, they resisted Roman occupation in North Africa, much the same way the Egyptians did. And then again, there was also this theological debate that has occurred in North Africa, the one that we talked about last week. The majority of the Amazigh that are in North Africa that are Christian are Donatists, meaning they followed the church father Donatus, who's told the people that back in the late 3rd century, if you left the church, you can't come back. If you renounce Christ, if you gave up Holy Scripture when the Roman Emperor Diocletian was oppressing Christianity, you can't come back to the church. God may forgive you. You could be in the church, but you can't give sacrament to anybody. You can't have any type of position in the church because you renounce Christ. Whereas you had other people in the region, like St. Augustine, who's also a North African, said, no, we should forgive these people. We should let them back in the church, and they should have, God forgave us, so we should forgive people too. That position was, of course, upheld by the Romans because they said, yeah, hey, Diocletian messed up, but now we're Christian now under Constantine, so yeah, let those people back in the church. That became the official position of the Roman church that's in charge of everything. Well, that didn't stop the Donatist and his followers from saying, well, forget that. And it became a religion, a Christian theology that was against both the Roman Catholic theology as well as Roman presence in North Africa. So many of the Amazigh adopted that position, and they also took the Christianity and they adapted it to their own local traditions, which is something that you see in Europe as well. I mean, wherever Christianity and Islam go, oftentimes people adapt it to their local traditions. Hence, in Western Europe, when Christianity comes into contact with the pagans of Western Europe, a lot of things get adopted. Somehow Christ's birthday becomes the same time as Saturnalia. There becomes a fertility symbol in terms of this Easter bunny that gets connected with Christ's resurrection. You get people bringing trees from outside their house and putting lights on it and connecting that to Jesus somehow. That's Western European paganism that has been adopted in Western European Christianity. They did the same thing in Africa. They took that Donatist Christianity and adopted it to their local traditions in North Africa. So they have that, but they're not united. The Amazigh in North Africa are not united. You have different kingdoms, you have different clans, you have different chiefdoms, and they're not united the way the Nubians were united when they were ready to face the Arabs. So when the Arabs make their way throughout North Africa, it starts out relatively easy because they're fighting against the Romans, because the Romans are the ones that are in charge of North Africa. So they're fighting against the Romans. The Romans are already weak, and they're pretty easily taken out by the Arabs. But then the Amazigh are there, and they're seeing the situation. They're saying, wait a minute, the Romans are getting defeated by this new group. Maybe this is an opportunity to get completely free. So instead of letting this new group come in and take over, let's fight against them too. And just like the Nubians, the Amazigh militarily are a match for the Arabs. North Africa is mostly desert. They know how to fight in the desert just like the Arabs know how to fight in the desert. They have masters of cavalry the same way the Arabs have masters of cavalry. They know how to fight on camels the same way the Arabs know how to fight on camels. They know hit and run tactics. They know guerrilla warfare. They know all of these things. So militarily, they're a match for the Arabs. But the problem is they don't have unity. When they do have unity, they're very strong. We talked about the Dantes. There was one group in North Africa that was united. It was a group of Amazigh led by Dahia al-Kahina, or Dahia the sorcerer. Al-Kahina means the sorceress in Arabic, because the Arabs couldn't understand how a woman could be in a leadership position like this without her being some type of witch or sorceress. So her real name is just Dahia, but the Arabs put on that little asterisk, the sorcerer. But she was a chieftain, a leader among the Amazigh, who had, she was the daughter of a leader, one Tabeta of the Jawara clan, tribe, which had always provided the kings to that section of the Amazigh in North Africa. So this is around Tunisia, Algeria region of North Africa. She had replaced a leader named Kusala, and around 690, she had a battle with the Arab general Hassan ibn Numan. And she's leading this battle. She's around 50 years old at the time where she's leading her troops into battle, and she's able to defeat him quite easily. Her troops know how to fight like the Arabs. So just like in Nubia, the first battle, in the first couple of battles, they pretty much rout the Arabs. The Arabs are forced to retreat further eastward, back into eastern Libya and Egypt. When she does this, Dahia is able to capture prisoners of war from the Arab army. And she keeps those prisoners, and one of the prisoners, a prisoner by the name of Khalid, she takes a particular liking to. Now, depending on what source you read, she adopts Khalid almost as a son, or she takes Khalid on as a lover. Depending on how salacious you want the material to be, that's, you know, what the writers have decided would occur. But what we do know is she gave this prisoner extra treatment and treated him like a person, a member of the family. The problem is Khalid was a double agent. He never, even though he was treated well and all this, he still wanted to be a part of the Arab project and the Arab invasion. So what he was doing, he was actually writing letters secretly back to the Arab generals in Egypt about what was going on among the Amazigh. Because for Dahia, after defeating the Arabs, she thought they were one of these armies that wasn't going to stay, and that we need to make the territory inhospitable to them so they won't want to come back. So in her task of trying to unite the different Amazigh tribes, she made some missteps. One of the things she did, when it looked like the Arabs were amassing their troops again to make another offensive, she burnt down a lot of the crops and destroyed a lot of the agriculture in the region. She decided to use a scorched earth defense. Her thinking being, the Arabs are only here for plunder. So if there's nothing for them to plunder, they'll leave, and then we can rebuild. It's kind of a long-term strategy. Well, the Amazigh, who were just barely united anyway, most of them didn't go for this. A lot of the chiefs and others, they said, we don't like this idea. We're not going to go along with it. So she had to use heavy-handed tactics, fighting against her own people to try to get this tactic to work. So that caused a lot of division. And then, of course, Khalid is writing back to the Arab generals about all this division among the Amazigh. So when the Arabs do come back in, they're able to take advantage of these divisions. They're able to get victory after victory until finally Dahlia is forced to fight her final fight against the Arabs. And it takes place, it's very cinematic. It takes place in this abandoned Roman amphitheater, almost like, think about the Colosseum, or think of the places where the gladiators fought. She and her final troops are fortified in this Colosseum, and she's fighting against the Arabs, and it's not going well. So she tells her sons, listen, we're not going to win this fight, but I'm not going to become a prisoner to the Arabs. I'm going to fight them to the death, but you don't need to. You get out of here, you join the Arab army, and you know, that'll be that. But I'm going to stay here and fight it out to the end. So that in narrative in particular says a lot. We don't know if it was actually her biological sons that went over to fight for the Arabs, but it essentially, the Amazigh as a people eventually realized that the situation is better if they just join the Arab army and fight or submit to the Arabs, because again, just like everybody else, we'll just pay the tax, and maybe they won't be as bad as the Romans, because clearly we're not united enough to fight against them and to win, because we keep fighting amongst ourselves. So the decision was made by many of the different groups to actually join the Arabs. And that's exactly what happened. They would join the Arab army, and through that process of militarization, many of them would become Muslim. So when you look at North Africa today, when you look at Morocco, Algeria, northern Mauritania, Libya, Tunisia, the reason why these are Muslim countries is this time period right here that we're talking about. Many of the men that joined the military became Muslims because they didn't want to pay the tax. And Christianity didn't last that long in North Africa, because it had already been incorporated with different local traditions, and it didn't take much for many of those people to say, well, let's just convert to Islam. So they were able to even bring Islam into their local traditions as well. So by the time we get to 690, going into the 700s, the army that entered North Africa, the Arab army that came down from Palestine into the Nile Valley, into the Nile Delta, and all of that. By the time we get to the end of the 7th century, the end of the 600, that army is the majority Amazigh now, is majority Northwest African. And they're able to take over, again, many of these coastal cities here on North Africa, and they get to the end of North Africa, Northwest Africa, and since they haven't really lost, now they want to make the move to cross into Europe, cross the Straits of Gibraltar. In fact, that's why we get the name the Straits of Gibraltar. And when this happens, that army is known as the Moors in European historiography, the Moors. That Moorish army, even though it has Arab generals, and even the generals, most of the generals are Amazigh, including the main general, Tariq. Tariq is a Berber. He's an Amazigh person. So the leadership is Arab and Amazigh, but the majority of the fighters are Amazigh at this point. They're North African Muslims that are about to cross into the Iberian Peninsula, Spain and Portugal, and they're going to take over from 711 all the way up to 1492, where you have Africans and Arabs ruling Spain and Portugal. By the time it's 1492, they only have a small portion of it, but that's how long it takes for the Europeans to get them finally out of the Iberian Peninsula. But we'll talk more about the Moors in part 2 of this class, but we'll stop there today because that's where we end up. And we'll talk about what they did when they get into Spain and Portugal in part 2 of this class. We'll talk about what happens there. But that is how quickly the world changed once the Arabs get united and adopt Islam. The Prophet Muhammad dies in 632. By the time we get to 711, everything you see in purple is what the Arabs now control. What's now under the rulers that are Muslim. This Arab Islamic empire is everything that you see in purple. So less than 100 years, like very quickly, this occurs, about 80 years. One of the fastest growing, and it changes the world. It brings the world closer together. You can see it stretches all the way from India to what larger than the Roman Empire in terms of its impact and things that it touches. And it's really important for us as studying African history, because what you have here when you have the Arabs take over Northern Africa, you get more written sources about things going on in East Africa, West Africa, and even parts of North Central Africa that we can now rely on to reconstruct the history. So there's a lot more written sources that we can look at. When we continue this class, we're going to talk about archaeology again. Oral history comes into play much more because our next uh, course, the next part of this course goes from 7/11 to 1896. And we start that in February. So, wait for that. Robin mentioned something, and I'm going to send this out to everyone that's registered for this course, and it will also be a link to the updated course website on the YouTube pages associated with these videos. There will be a post-test, but it's a digital post-test. We won't take it today in class. We will take it, you'll take it whenever you feel like it individually. And the link will be there. You can take the test. You'll see the updated course website because Daniel and I have been working on that. And we have our old course website, which is operated through Thinkific, and those will still be active. You can still use it to do all the readings and look at all the previous videos and share with other people. But we're now transitioning things to a new course website based off of the Canvas learning management system. Long story short, Canvas is what we use in the universities that I work at in the United States. We have online classes. There's a free version of that. And in fact, there's actually a paid version that we're working on here in Ottawa to get to you all. You won't have to pay for it. We'll pay for all the bells and whistles, and you'll be able to register for the class and take this course as an online class. You'll be able to see the videos, you'll be able to see the readings, there'll be activities associated with that. So all of that is being worked on, and this one is almost done. We got a couple more things to finalize, and that post-test will be there. So you'll be able to test yourself. You can see all the readings. So essentially for this cycle of our classes, going from now all the way till next June, we're going to be transitioning each one of our courses to this new course learning management system called Canvas. So you'll still have access to the old one. That's never going away, but we're going to be pushing people toward this new one. And as always, everything still remains 100% completely free. You'll never be asked to pay for anything. It's the only thing I ask you to do is to share it with other people and to actually use it and learn from it. That being said, our next seminar that starts next week is our Sankofa seminar on snitches and sellouts. Snitches and sellouts. Last year, we did a seminar on Paul Robeson. So every September, we do for 4 weeks a very focused seminar. This one is going to be on people that actively betrayed African people in revolutions and revolts. When we talk about sellouts, we're talking about leaders who, for their own personal gain, have sold out the progress and development of African people. And we're going to really talk about the past 500 years. We're not going to go so far back. We're really going to talk about the past 500 years. So we'll talk about people like this guy who worked, who was present at Malcolm X's assassination, but he was working for the NYPD and other folks. We'll talk about leaders such as Shambe, who worked with the Belgians and was instrumental in the assassination of Patrice Lumumba. We'll talk about James Wormley, the first black man who was ever hired as an agent in the FBI, whose job was to destabilize the Garvey movement. So we're going to talk about people like these, not to valorize them, but to show you what to look out for when we talk about snitches and sellouts and how where our history could have been had these people not decided to choose selfishness over the people's development. And we'll talk about the movements that they betrayed and everything going on with that. So that's what we'll do for 4 weeks in September. So the registration for this is available. Please register. Tell other people to register. We should have we will have great conversations around this topic. And as always, you're all invited to come down to 235 Montreal Road, right where we have our classes. The in-person interaction is always great. It's open to you every Saturday at 11 a.m. And we start this one immediately next Saturday. So with that being said, let's open it up for questions, comments, announcements before we close out. And I did not forget about David H's question. I'll answer that more in terms of African people in a second. Daniel, anything in the chat or any hands?
I don't see anything in the chat. Somebody did have a question earlier. They said, sure who to ask, but I was hoping I could be added to the email list for future classes, and then they drop their email address.
Okay, we'll make sure that you're on that list. Yeah, we'll make sure.
And Mr. Francis has his hand up.
Okay.
Okay, thank you again, sir. When you were talking about snitches and sellouts, I was flabbergasted to learn that in the Jim Crow era, they had black religious leaders who were actually selling out their own black people to the KKK. Can you imagine that?
Yes, I can.
Okay.
Yes, I can. Yeah. Selfishness knows no bounds in some people. So, yes.
And these were supposed to be God-fearing people, Bible thumping and all of this sort of a thing. But yet, for all, they were stooges.
Yep. Cost people their lives. Yeah. Oh yeah. So we're going to talk about a lot of these examples over the next 4 weeks. And let me go to David H's question before we go back into it. So we were talking about how this applies, and I gave the example of China and how it applies to the African world. I think we're in a similar position to where China was in the early 20th century. When I talk about the African, when I talk about African people, primarily the 90% of us that are in Africa, but even other places in the world. And something is going to have to come along. And I would assume it to be a secular ideology or something to give us that unifying desire to rebuild society, African society anew. Because what we got right now is not working. And you see it with the youth protests in Nigeria, the youth protests in Kenya, and all over. People are fed up with how things are. And we want to avoid the negative aspects of China's development in terms of the Great Leap Forward, which was not, that's a great name, but there was a lot of destruction associated with that Great Leap Forward. The Cultural Revolution, there was a lot of violence and things associated with that. If you could take those types of changes, remove the negative elements of them, then we could have something to work with. And we're going to need it because we're on borrowed time. I mean, not only as African people, but as a species. We're destroying this planet. We're doing some horrendous things, and you're seeing the results in real time, even though people continue to deny it. You're seeing these major floods everywhere. There's flooding in Sudan that's killed a lot of people. You're seeing these tropical storms that are growing in intensity. And this is really, and then if you're not paying attention in Africa now, there's famine all over the place. And food insecurity all over the place. So we're right where China was in the early 20th century. And we're right where the Arabs were in the 7th century. So what's going to unite us? What is going to be that thing that finally says, you know what, we're going to come together, figure this thing out, and create sustainable and just development for African people? I think we're close to that. I think the youth are at least have the door open, and they want new possibilities. It's just who's going to articulate them, who's going to be the figures that give voice to this in a way that attracts a lot of people, in a way that's non-exploitative. So I think we could do it. I'm an optimist, so I know we will. But yeah, that's how I see it. And other folks, you could jump in and give your thoughts and ideas on this. All right, Robin, go ahead.
My brother, I'll give some thoughts on that for sure. It's so I think part of what we have to do is just kind of be spreading the truth, right, about the things that you mentioned, like what's actually causing those things. What are the key things, right? So part of it for sure is, and you mentioned the word exploitation, but like a global economic system based on exploitation, which we have, right? And so part of spreading the truth about that is also ourselves not like recognizing we're so integrated with it, but part of the way we can not be integrated, right? If you can, it's like try to do even small things, right? Like part of that exploitive system are things like, well, like Walmart, Uber, and Amazon, right?
Yeah.
They're actually like it's no coincidence that almost every Uber Eats driver you see is a racialized person, brand, well, a lot of black people actually, right? At Walmart, so you got to like stop, and then there are ways you can stop participating in those systems, right? I don't shop at Walmart, don't, right? So, but I think that's going to be the unifying. That's one way to the unifying force for people. It's going to, and this is not new, right? It's a class thing, but the folks who are like the whole corporate structure, like they're the propaganda is so powerful there in terms of and just kind of like just keeping, not even recognizing who's causing all this stuff, right? Like even when you talk about inflation, right? All the story, just listen to stories about inflation. It's always they use this passive language like prices went up. Like they never mention who raised them, right? Like never. It's like it's happening on its own, like right? They never sit down. Yeah, or you never see rare. You ever see an interview, let's say, where they go and like talk to Galen West and say, "Buddy, why are you raising like that?" You never see that, right? So that's. Yeah, so I think that's one part of this. I also wanted to mention, and I put this in the chat. So just you started the class talking about the research, right, and the interdisciplinary research. So I wanted to highlight that after much pushing, the government announced that they have given $7 million to the organization CAFCAN in Toronto to launch the National Institute for People of African Descent, federally, right? Right. So this is. So now, the CAFCAN is going to need a lot of that. This is
Now, what is CAFCAN? What is it?
Oh, it's a social service organization in Toronto. I'm afraid exactly what CAFCAN stands for. Floydine Friedel Charles, I think, is the executive director. Right. So they're going to need a lot of support, right? But the potential there is for that institute to be doing some of this kind of stuff or right that you're talking about.
How much? Right? Wait, I'm sorry. I mean, how much? 7 million?
Yeah, which is not. Yeah,
that ain't that much.
No, it's not. No, it's not. No.
But okay, something. Yeah.
No, it's exactly no. That's all very true, right? So that's also whenever anything like this is announced, you want to take a critical look at it and go, are they doing this so they know it's ultimately going to fail? And then like, all right, so and these are questions that should be asked, right? For sure, right? But just want to highlight that. And then finally, okay, I think Clyde knows this for sure. So this is again the update on my own trial, right? And I want to raise this because what the latest thing that happened really shows the deep racism in the judicial system. Okay, so the judge found, and I was not surprised at this, against me, okay, and awarded the two black guys $70,000 in total, $35,000 each. Okay, now the key thing here is I had asked this judge to recuse himself from the case because his firm is involved in another case I'm involved in where they're representing one of the other parties, right? So a pretty clear case, right? And I want to just make clear to folks what the principle here is. When you ask a judge to recuse him or herself, the idea is you're saying, hey, the legal concept is there a reasonable apprehension of bias in the mind of a reasonable person? Okay, so think about that. So this guy is the judge in my case. He's the lawyer representing the other side in another case. So the legal question is there a reasonable apprehension of, or could there be a reasonable apprehension of bias in the mind of a reasonable person? Okay, so I'm going to read you, this is short, from his decision. Line 142. In the current motion before me, I place myself in the position of a reasonable person who is given the facts as described above. Would that person see a reasonable apprehension of bias on my part? That is, could I proceed to render judgment in the various cases involving Mr. Brown with any concern as to fairness to my adjudication process? That's all fine, but this is his next line. All the parties in the present set of cases before me are black. The witnesses are all black. The question of any bias by me based on race is not an issue.
but that's not what.
Exactly. I'm glad you raised that. That's not the legal question,
Right.
right? That is not right. Whether he's going to raise it in this particular case isn't the question. What he said before, and so and anyway, so there was a number, and that's a legal error, right? So when you have a ruling against it, if you want to appeal, you have to show that the judge made a legal error, right? And he's made a lot. But here's the racism in the system. If I go and appeal and I win, what they'll order is a new trial before probably another racist white judge, right? Right. So, and I've got I'm figuring out how I'm going to respond to this, but bottom line is though, there's no data actually collected on judicial racial bias, like how they actually decide whether to decide more, like for Black people, which is crazy. But that's the situation in Canada. So I now have this one anecdote, which is so clear. And let me tell you, man, it's gonna be this is gonna be my story when I go to the UN and everything. And I tell you, we're having a lobby day in the fall. We actually meet with the Prime Minister. This is gonna be one of the stories that I tell.
So did he not? So he
Right.
didn't even address at all the actual root of about him working at the place. Cause he could have easily said, and I'm not saying he should make this argument, but he
Yeah.
could have said like, well, I'm not directly involved. There's no bias because I'm not directly involved in that.
Oh, he tried that. Yeah, he said it was my firm that was representing the parents and the kid, not me. But that doesn't hold water because the actual law society's rules are that if a client is a client of one lawyer in a firm, they're a client of all the lawyers.
But he didn't write that in the motion.
He said, yeah, it was handled by one of my associates, which is not valid based on what I just said.
Yeah.
Yeah. So he tried all that. Oh, I should mention another thing. So he didn't recuse himself. And then in terms of here's the other key factor. So the trial was me suing these guys for libel because they said I physically threatened one of them. They countersued because I'd called them house Negroes. Okay. So the guy ruled that that calling someone a house Negro is defamatory all the time. Right. And that again is a legal error because it's like, again, now people on this call, I know people probably all of you find that the term house Negro offensive, and it is, but it's not defamatory. And in my closing argument, I said to the guy, I said, dude, it's like calling a Jewish person a Nazi. Okay. It's harmful, it's hurtful, it's the whole thing, but it's not defamatory. And I told the story of my son's godmother is a white Jew, right? Progressive Jew. And she told me a story about how, like, she's a professor. Years ago, she brought in some policy about something that some student didn't like, and the student called her a Nazi. And she's like, she kind of laughed it off. It's like, it's not defamatory. But if you call a Jewish person a card-carrying member of the Nazi Party, and they are not, then that is defamatory. Just like them saying I physically threatened them when I didn't. Yeah, but the judge, he was not. He was just. This was like such a clear example of the guy just like clearly just. Well, he thought I called him racist and he got pissed off. He didn't like me so he even mentions it. He says, yeah, Mr. Brown, refers to him as a black activist, something he's obviously quite proud of. Like he clearly was showing he doesn't like. He basically ruled didn't like me as his uppity Negro. He liked them as the more upstanding black folks, and he found in their favor. So that's where things are at. So it looks like I'm gonna appeal.
Right, keep us updated. Daniel, any other hands? Anything in the chat?
Yes, there was one question in the chat. Someone said, Netflix is putting out movies around African history. Does anyone know if they're being done in collaboration with Nollywood to give us some shot at good and Black-centric representation?
I don't know if they're being done in collaboration with Nollywood. I know they did a pretty good one on Queen and Jenga. It actually was like I watched it. It was pretty accurate. It's pretty good. It had some good scholars on there. That one was good. Nollywood has been producing their own historical stuff. I saw a really good one. It wasn't Netflix. I think that was Amazon on Fumalayo Ransom Kuti, the mother of Fela Kuti and an activist in her own right. That one was really good on Amazon Prime, and it was just, I mean, Nollywood. And if you go through what Nollywood is producing, they're producing a lot of historic things that happen in Nigeria. A lot of historical narratives with kingdoms like the Kingdom of Benin and the Oyo King. Like there's a lot there that they are actually doing. So they're not waiting on Netflix. They end up on Netflix, but I don't think Netflix has any role in their production. But there are a few. So if you go on Netflix and you just scroll through Nollywood movies, or if you go on Amazon Prime and scroll through, there are a few historical dramas that are on there that are worth checking out. Just like people check out, Downton Abbey and others, the European stuff. There's a lot there. So yeah. And if anybody knows anything else, you please let us know.
I was just one comment on that in terms of just stories linked to like historical truths, I guess. My wife and I went last night to see a movie called 1992. Have you heard of it?
Mm.
It's
No.
it's good. It's with it's 1992 is when Rodney King happened.
Okay.
So it's set at that time. It's so it's one story about this one father, and it's around that time. But hey, good drama, and just kind of set at that, again, around the time of King. So that, which is really more in the backdrop, but the story is the main thing. But hey, great movie starring Tyrese, who I like.
Okay. Oh,
And
that's why
gives-
he's been on everything. Like
okay. Oh yeah,
Yeah.
no, is he promoting it? Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, that's what it is. All right. Mr. Francis, go ahead.
Yes, you mentioned in passing about exploitation, and I thought I'll just bring up this idea. A Canadian mining company named Lucara Diamond Corporation discovered the second largest rough diamond in Botswana last week, Thursday.
Yes.
It's supposed to be a 2,492 carat diamond. My question is, as you talk about exploitation, to whom does this diamond belong?
Well, we know the answer to that, but we know the capitalist response to that. It belongs to the mining company that mined it. But yeah, I mean, this is a prime example. So I heard about that diamond. I didn't know it was a Canadian mining company that
Yes,
found it. But yeah, I mean, it's unfortunate. But yeah, that they'll control it. They'll make somebody rich that has never touched the ground, has never probably stepped foot in Botswana, and yeah, this is what we're dealing with. And it's not even just diamonds. I mean, it's everything under the ground of African people, indigenous people, is usually not controlled by those people, and we don't benefit from it in any meaningful way in a lot of times. So I think that's a great example, a great thing for us to point out to people. Because I saw the picture of the brother. It's actually, the picture I saw was a brother holding it. But I didn't really read the story. I didn't get into who controlled it. But yeah, it's a perfect illustration of where we're at, where we have richness right underneath our feet and don't control any of it. And think about, it's a funny story. Another thing, in the country west of Botswana, in Namibia, it's a big thing in the news now, because they decided that, hey, we're going to kill like 700 like elephants and I think giraffes to feed people because of food insecurity. And the rest of the world's like, oh, how could you possibly do that? It's like, people got to eat. You know what I mean? Like, so there's a lot of these types of things going on. And yeah, I might start using that picture of, look, see this is what's under your feet, but we don't control it. I think I see another hand. Daniel, who is that? Can't on my glass.
Miss Leslie, go ahead.
Okay.
Thanks. Morning, folks. Can you hear me okay?
Yep.
I might be jumping ahead a little bit to the snitches and sellouts course, but I saw a quote by James Baldwin. It's pretty long, but it basically is speaking about snitches and sellouts and how we need to assume always that there will be a few actors in our community who are effectively that. And I wondered if there is any evidence in history, Clyde, of really strong like risk mitigation and just like plan B, plan C kind of thing, because of this awareness that there is going to always be somebody who is in it for themselves.
Yeah, I mean, there were steps that were trying to take in to mitigate this. Oaths were really important in slave rebellions. People took oaths, and they really believed them because they had spiritual aspects to them that were to try to mitigate against that. We get later on, we'll talk about other movements like the Black Liberation Army. The reason why, and even for, and to some extent, the Deacons for Defense, even though they had a couple of informants, but one of the tactics that they would do is they would use cell structures. And this is something that a lot of groups do, where you don't know the full extent of the organization, depending on where you're at in the organization. So even if you do snitch, it doesn't jeopardize the entire operation. So for instance, there are people in the Black Liberation Army that couldn't tell you how many people were in the Black Liberation Army, how many cities it was operating in, because they didn't know that information. They didn't need to know that information. So you got those types of ways to kind of counter it. But the problem was, in some instances, even members in leadership might be working for them folks. So yeah, it's really interesting. Adjacent to our struggles, but I've been reading a lot about the indigenous people's struggles in the mid 20th century and the founding of the American Indian movement and all this. And they use the same tactics with them too. You had people that were high up that it was sad. I was reading a book by Dennis Banks, one of the founders of AIM, in his memoir autobiography. And it gets toward the end of the book, and he has almost like an epilogue where it basically says, all the stuff that I've written and these things that I was engaged in with my wife, I found out my wife was an informant from the years like 1970 to like 1980, like so it was they weren't married anymore. They had gotten separated, I think, in the 90s something, but he had like found out his wife was like an informant for like this period of time. It was like crazy. So yeah, we'll talk about some of those tools that organizations attempted to use to fight against it, and we'll talk about the effectiveness of each and all of that when we go through it, because there are some telltale signs of these folks, particularly on college campuses. You can see it. I've been a professor, and Kwame Ture, formerly Stokely Carmichael, used to say, like, there was a time period there were no FBI agents on campuses. Now they're on every college campus. And when you teach long enough and you have the kind of conversations that I have in class, it's easy to spot. It's telltale signs. They're not older students, like, because I teach undergraduates, so it's not like they're 35-year-olds, but they're like 26-year-olds. Like, you're not old enough to be considered like too out of place, but looking at you, I know. And then their transcript is kind of incomplete, and it's just, you could tell. And then they're usually extra in class, trying to get you to say something about, oh, we're gonna bring down the system and all, and they try to get students to do all that. You can see it. But we'll talk about all of that in the upcoming weeks. Any other questions in the chat, Daniel? Hands up. I don't see any hands.
I don't see anything else in the chat.
All right, so everyone, look out. If you register for this class, I will send you the email for the new course website. It'll also be, again, associated with the YouTube page, the YouTube channels it's on. So yeah, we're continuing to move. If you're interested, come on, please join us, 235 Montreal Road every Saturday at 11 a.m. Everybody stay safe. We'll talk soon.